Hello and welcome back to another episode of Wide Awake Politics. It is Friday, January 24th, 2025. We are still talking about day one of the Trump administration. So this is episode 3. We're on the tail end of day one. We're still talking about the executive actions and orders that were signed by the president. The last one we did talk about was all the rescissions of harmful executive orders and actions that he said were harmful, that he removed from the Biden administration's executive orders. I do have to make one correction because I do want to be truthful whenever, I know I'm wrong, is the fact that I did say something about he did rescind the science and technology executive order from the Biden administration. That one was more... he ended up putting in another one yesterday that had his Science and Technology Council on there. It was a list of names. So that one was replaced with one. I don't see any other replacements that have happened for any of the other ones that have been rescinded that were questionable. And then the really big ones, they don't intend to replace them with anything. But this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to hit up a couple of these executive actions that followed right after that. There was a flurry of them. We're in the shock and awe, right? The campaign had talked about, the incoming administration there'd been leaks about the shock and awe, and a lot of people thought it was about the immigration, but it's really about these executive actions and the disregard of the Constitution on some of these. And we're going to get into some of the other actions that have been called into question against the Constitution recently, just in the past week. So that'll be interesting. But let's get into some of these executive actions that were signed. The first one that was signed right after the initial rescissions of those harmful executive orders was the Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship. So again, you can find all of these on the whitehouse.gov website under presidential actions. So this specific one, I am actually going to tell you something. I besides the verbiage and everything, the actual concept of this executive action, executive order, I actually agree with, besides how they wrote it completely partisan, and directed the attorney general to, investigate the last 4 years of the last 4 years of the government. But the actual Restoring Freedom of Speech and Ending Federal Censorship, the background behind it is that during times of COVID, administration came in and different agencies of the past administration came in and worked with different social media platforms to kind of reduce the popularity of some of COVID misinformation, disinformation accounts, some prolific accounts. They asked them not to promote some alternative treatments to COVID that were not FDA approved. But I believe that there's a huge problem with misinformation and disinformation in our country, especially on social media platforms. That's absolutely a verifiable truth, I think, for anybody, that we know that. We have to do a better job as people and as citizens of not feeding into everything that we see and then actually checking to see if what we are looking at and what we're reading is true. I am the first one to admit that I've seen things and I've reacted a certain way, and then I start looking at them like, oh, that's not what that means. Or that's not really what was said, or that's not even true. Like, that's a fake, that's AI, whatever. But it causes me to do a lot more searching and verifying facts, from a numerous different, sources. I try to go to legitimate sources and try to find exact quotes or anything else, especially from people that are coming into the new administration, find their published works. Don't rely on the clips that you get, on different news sites, or social media. But that's just, I 100% think that the federal government should not go into a privately held company or a publicly traded company and tell them what they can and cannot produce. I think that for any administration, because I look at the rule as I would definitely not like the Trump administration, even though it kind of is already kind of like they don't have to like go in there. They're just kind of buddies with all of them now. I wouldn't like the Trump administration to try to force other companies to put out his guidance as the law, as not the law, but as the official truth, right? Like, we need to, just because Trump says it, we still have to verify. And especially because if President Trump says it, because we know he lies. I've been almost like wanting to pull my hair out because of the things that he says are not true. And he continues to say them like they are. But we're going to continue discussing this because, again, I absolutely agree that the federal government should have nothing to do with going to private companies, everything else. Just like I think that Twitter had every right to kick President Trump off his social media platform because him inciting a riot. Remember, he got kicked off of social media platforms, because he was inciting a riot and an insurrection that occurred on January 6th. He got kicked off of those things for that. And there was a big uproar about from the right about how the company should not be able to censor the president, right? They're not censoring the president. He doesn't have to be on those social media platforms. Just like they have the right to kick people off that they feel that they can, the government has no right to go to those companies and tell them what they should and should not promote. I think that's a pretty fair statement. But anyway, going on to the next one. One thing I would like to point out is that in that one, section 3 Bravo, there is a caveat that says that he directs the Attorney General to investigate the federal government of the last 4 years. Cool. The very next one is ending the weaponization of the federal government, right? So I think we've talked about this a little bit before. I don't believe that the federal government was weaponized against Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump has always been a criminal. And I think that his decision to run for president and like the amount of publicity and the amount of things that he says out in public, he's admitted to a lot of the crimes and everything. He's put himself out there and shown the crimes that he's committed. So yes, people went after him. Federal and state and civil courts went after him for various crimes that he committed. He's a felon because a jury of his peers convicted him. He owes a civil judgment to a woman because a jury has awarded that based off of evidence that they said that he did something wrong. Okay? That's not weaponizing. That's just going after crimes. But anyway, so this one specifically calls out in section 3A, and then in 3B for the Attorney General and the Director of National Intelligence to investigate and identify any instances where conduct, and this is where I think it's important, to investigate and identify any instances where conduct appears to have been weaponized, right? Just appears. I'm trying to find the exact verbiage because I don't want to get it wrong. Court appears to have been contrary to the purposes and policies of this order. Appears, not that it did, but it appears to. So that's what we're dealing with in this one. Just appears to. What is the appearance? It's probably in the eye of the beholder, right? Besides just talking about him in this, There's specific instances that he's talking about with parents protesting school board meetings. Some of these ones that were investigated for protesting school board meetings, that the president and his administration and the talking heads on stations like Newsmax and Fox News, what they won't tell you is that these parents protesting at school board meetings were also sending death threats to the school board members for instituting policies that were required by the state and federal government. They were getting death threats for doing their job. Now, and then it goes on to say, and other Americans who are simply exercising their constitutionally protected rights. He's specifically talking about somebody he actually just pardoned yesterday. And this happens to be a woman who was put in jail for 4 years because she violated the FACE Act. Now, if you listen to the confirmation hearing for Attorney General Pam Bondi, one of the specific questions that Senator Amy Klobuchar had asked Attorney General Pam Bondi, the nominee, is if she would uphold the FACE Act. And that is to ensure that everybody has access, right? That you are not obstructed from entering the front of a clinic entrance. Inside of that, it says that inside of that act, it says that nobody can interfere, block, or do anything at the entrance to a clinic, right? You can't do anything like that. Now, this one woman had stated that all she was doing was praying. She wasn't doing anything besides praying. And that's what a lot of the supporters will tell you. What she got 4 years for in a jury by her peers was the fact that she had placed her body up against the front of the building. It was not allowing workers or patients or anybody in to the clinic. And then when somebody tried to get past because they were going into the clinic that they were legally and rightfully allowed to walk into, their right? She obstructed them and then hurt their wrist, damaged their wrist whenever they were trying to go in. And whenever they said, hey, you're hurting my wrist, she pushed herself further against it. So we can have a debate on a lot of different things, but what I will not have a debate on is the facts of a case that was decided in a court of law. Now, I will also say that 4 years, I don't know. I don't know. But the fact that you cannot tell me that this woman was just peacefully praying when she was obstructing and criminally defying a federal law. But she was completely, she was pardoned yesterday. Again, whatever with the pardons. But don't write that in there like this is actual fact, because it's not. It's not fact. It's not fact that they were just protesting. Protesting does not include sending death threats to people and trying to follow up on them and then stalking them. Anyway. All right. So the very next one is the return to work in-person policy. Return to in-person work for federal agencies. It says all federal departments and agencies, the executive branch of government shall, as soon as practical, take all necessary steps to terminate remote work arrangements and require employees to return to work in person at their respective duty stations on a full-time basis. Now, let me tell you something. I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. There's literally not enough space to bring everybody that is at in-person or that is work from home for them to return back in person. Because I don't care what they're telling you on a bunch of different things. This is not just one department. This is all federal agencies. There's a lot of places across a whole bunch of different agencies that after COVID, what they did was they measured the efficiency of the work from home folks versus the work in the office folks. And they realized there was more efficiency for some of these staff members, especially for staff members that actually had teams that worked geographically separated. Because now you're bringing somebody that it doesn't work with anybody locally, really. Their teams are geographically separated because of reasons, right? Because we're just not just federally working on something that just is over here in DC. Federally, we're talking about all over the nation. So you have people in different offices across the country that are on a team and they're working together for one purpose of that office, right? So now we've leased back their space. The federal government has leased back the space because guess what? We did studies that said that these folks that are working from home are more efficient than that. So we can give back their space. Gave it back. Because we're actually going to try to figure out a way to ensure that the money is going further, right? We're practically spending our money. But now, in one fell swoop, he's asked for everybody return to work. We don't have the space. And now you're bringing somebody that sits at home, does all their work, works with all the people from across the country, sometimes across the world, right? Now you're making them go into a space where they don't have a desk, they don't have a cubicle, they don't have anything, and some of them are working in conference rooms. So this is going to drive, it feeds into our discussion when we talk about Russ Vogt, because and I'm just going to preview this, one of the things that Russ Vogt is actually on record stating is that he calls them bureaucrats. He's talking about federal civilians, government civilians that are working. He says, I want to make it hard for them. I want to ensure that when they wake up, they are unhappy. We want to put civil servants in trauma. So, when I tell you that people have actually gotten notice that they actually have to start, that this says, oh, yeah, well, y'all got to figure it out. They're actually putting in notice that they have to know and start on Monday of this year. So now you have people, they're literally doing this to try to drive people out of the government. When I tell you that working with federal contractors and government civilians, we are constantly asked to do more with less. Constantly asked to do more with less. Every single government civilian is overtasked. And now what they're doing with this is they're telling us, we don't care about any of your situations. We don't care that this has been the standard for the last few years and that this is what you've become accustomed to. Screw that. You have to come back in. You know how much less work gets done whenever you have water cooler discussions and you just kind of hang out and just kind of throw the ball up and down and all that kind of stuff. There's studies that show the efficiency of working from home. What are we doing? Anyway, we'll get to that. We'll get to more of that when we discuss the Mr. Vogt. So the next one is talking about the regulatory freeze pending review. So that means that there will be no more regulations that have been trying to be put in place or anything else. It's just basically saying that none of them will be approved and placed as official regulations until somebody that was appointed after January 20th, 2025 reviews it. So that's ensuring that no regulations that were approved under the Biden administration that just had not been gone through the full process to be published yet, those are no longer valid. They will not, they can't be published or anything. And they'll be reviewed and looked at by the new OMB director, which again, we'll get into. Brings us to the final one before we start our next episode on Russ Vogt is the hiring freeze. So the hiring freeze is basically says, hereby order a freeze of the federal hiring of federal civilian employees to be applied throughout the executive branch. As part of this freeze, no federal civilian position that is vacant at noon on January 20th, 2025 may be filled, and no new position may be created except as otherwise provided in this memorandum or other applicable law. There are thousands of people that have been approved for jobs that met all of the pre-employment rules and had a start date after January 20th, 2025 that just had all of their offers rescinded. I've seen people from Texas especially Austin. I've seen people from Washington State. I've seen people from Colorado. I've seen VA medical workers. Their offers were rescinded. The hiring freeze has happened. You can't get on USA Jobs and get it. It's not good. Thousands of people. You had people that moved across the country for federal jobs that just don't have a start date, that have their start date of 1 February, right? They moved across the country for their jobs with a start date. And they got the offer was rescinded. He does want to make sure that they know that nothing in this memorandum shall adversely impact the provisions of Social Security, Medicare, or veteran benefits. I want to tell you that, yeah, those things aren't affected by this order. They're still not... they're not abiding by the agreements they made with new VA employees that were supposed to start after January 20th, 2025. Also, this was the big one. So the IRS did have a huge hiring event that occurred over the last year because there was an increase to the amount of IRS workers. You've heard a lot about that. And what I'll tell you that my assessment is that when you have a older workforce and you need to make sure that they are, have people to backfill those positions, you need them. And that was part of the increased hire in the IRS people. The IRS, those positions that were hired, that were given start dates, all of those positions got rescinded. Some of y'all may feel like that's a great thing. Whatever. But what I will say is that this specific memo also says that this memorandum shall remain in effect for the IRS until they decide to lift the freeze. So the IRS, whatever. All right. So we are going to end this episode right here. And we are going to talk about the next episode. We're going to go into the OMB director and how all these things kind of fit into what he's been planning for the past 4 years. Now, I don't want to leave off on angry notes on any of this. What I will say is that it is, like I said, shock and awe, right? There's a lot of issues with a lot of different people, with a lot of different executive actions, a lot of things coming out, a lot of topics being just crossed. You can't keep up with them all. I know I can't. So I think for the best advice that I've heard over the past few days is pick a few areas that are the most important to you or something you know about, whatever, and focus on those. And then let other people focus on those other areas. I am going to sit here with the executive actions, keep going on those, go over the committee assignments. But what I feel like will probably end up being my biggest areas of concern are obviously LGBTQ rights and veterans' rights. Those will probably be my two main areas of concern. And those will probably be the two areas that I'm going to stick to mostly. But until we get through this transition period, I'm just going to try to hit as much as I can, and try to stay as informed as possible, try to get y'all as informed as possible. Another thing that I'll say, and I'll probably continue to say it, is if you voted for Trump in this administration, and then you're starting to see things like them going after the bishop, or them clearly not understanding civil rights versus DEI. Some of these things are kind of crazy, right? That they're doing. They're not talking about DEI anymore. They're going after actual civil rights. If you're like, oh, I thought they were only going after the criminals on the border, but you just saw yesterday that they detained a American veteran. If you see them going in and start trying to play politics with disaster relief funding, like they're doing right now in California, trying to tie disaster relief funding in California to voter ID laws. And if you live in some place like the South that gets natural disasters a lot, and say that this was somebody else, say this was Biden that says, you know what, I just don't like your policies on X, Y, and Z. So I'm not giving you that disaster relief funding until you change those policies. I want you to sit with that. And I want you to take a good look and say, what things can I admit are not what I expected? And what things can I say to my Congress people to tell them that this is not acceptable? Because they're going to continue going on and continue going on because you are going to remain silent on all of it. They think it's okay because y'all are silent. Pick an issue. Pick an issue. There's plenty of them. Pick one that you can speak up on. Pick one. I'm begging you to have empathy. But we go on. With or without the silent few, the silent many. We go on. So the ones that are here and that do say that these things are wrong, continue. Keep this work up. We got to. Stay informed. Be good fellow citizens. See you in a little bit.